So sweet. Oh. And again, I keep thinking Shimada needs a root. But I don't know how one will make a root out of Shimada's. Because we know where Shimada ends up. Kondo turned around and looked very surprised. I haven't been given any orders. I would like to help.
手伝うと言っても、今回の仕事は池田屋や金門の変の時とは違うんだよ。君はこんな役目には関わるべきではない。
It was true. This wasn't a patrol, or even a guarding mission. This was the assassination of a former comrade, and an attack on men who'd split from the Shinsengumi. I still wanted to help. Still, I wanted to do what I could. It might be my last chance to see Heisuke. Please, let me go. I won't get it in the way.
今回のは使いでも遊びでもねえんだ。
一時は同志だった奴らの暗殺だ。万が一のことがあれば、平助だって切ることになるかもしれねえんだぜ。
I know. It's not something to be taken lightly. I knew that the Shinsengumi had carried out these sorts of black operations before. There was no way I could have stayed with them and as long as I had and not known, but I couldn't just let them shoulder all the responsibility. I was done looking away until the deed was done. No more. Perhaps it's presumptuous of me to say so, but I consider myself a member of the Shinsengumi. And because we're going through this, I want to help everybody.
決意は固いようだな。
His face had lost its usual warmth. It wasn't anger or cruelty that it showed now, but the gravity of a general addressing his men.
ならばどうする？この一件において君は何をしたいんだね？
I had already decided. I would convince Heisuke. Kyo was a city of many streets. Some of them more quiet and isolated than others. Aburano Koji was one of these, and it was where Nakakura, Harada, and I hid with the rest of the men assigned to this task.
そろそろ来る頃だな。
We set out Ito's corpse as bait to draw the guard into a trap. My teeth bit into my lips so hard I had to stop before I drew blood. If Ito had been allowed to live, he would have been a danger to the Shinsengumi. I understood that. But this, it just seems... Is this something that could be forgiven?
辛いんなら見る必要はねえぜ。目をつぶってろ。
No. Whatever I might think of what we were about to do, this was my only chance to save Heisuke. I couldn't look away. We sat there for... I wasn't sure how long. Until we finally heard the sound of the guard approaching.
Masaka! 伊藤さん！俺、一体誰がこのような真似を
6 or 7 of them rushed forward to examine Ito's corpse. Among them, of course. He hadn't noticed us yet, but the taciturn, downcast boy I saw in the street was nothing like the Heisuke I'd known. Harada and Nagakura picked him out at the same moment I did. Silently, they both closed their eyes for a moment in silent prayers.
行くぞ。
ああ。
新八山佐野さん。それにお前もか。
なるほど。 兄貴の死体を餌に待ち伏せか。ゲスの集まりにふさわしい卑怯な真似をしてくれやがるぜ。長倉原田、兄貴を殺したのはお前らなんだろ。
Heisuke was drowned out by the cry of Miki, who in turn was interrupted by the sudden report of a gunshot.
なんだ、近くに誰かいるのか。
If he was hesitating, then it hadn't been the guardians who fired. Was it the Shinsengumi?
おいおい、一体どこのバカが撃ちやがった。
どこのバカとは釣れねえな。せっかくこの俺様が相手をしに来てやろうと思ったのによ。
Anyway, hello, human. I'm here to play with you. Oh, God. Shiranui? I'm a giddy?
おい、どうしてお前らがここにいるんだよ。
なんでってな。仕事だよ、仕事。頭の悪いお前らと、もっと頭の悪い御両エジの連中が罠にはまるのを見物しに来たってことさ。
He waved one of his arms casually in some sort of signal. Where did all these people come from?
よくもまあこれだけの人数を集めたもんだ。風体からすると薩摩の連中だな。薩摩だと。
I heard Mickey dubiously mumble from a distant location.
不意打ちのような真似をしたことは詫びましょう。だが我々も一応は判明に従う責務がありましてね。
薩摩の判明かよ。お前はともかく知らぬいは長州に関係してるんじゃなかったか。ご主人様を見限って薩摩についたってんなら笑うとこだけどな。
それがな、今や薩摩と長州は仲良し小良しらしくてな。んなことよりてめえらの心配をしたらどうだ。
As Shiranui spoke, the men behind him began to inch forward. I reached for my sword, but Harada stopped me.
壁を背にして俺の後ろにいろ。一歩でも近づくやつは俺が片っ端から倒してやる。
From the rest of the Shinsengumi, I heard the sounds of hands tightening on hilts and swords being loosened at the scabbards. I swallowed.
どういうことか説明しろ。お前らが薩摩藩の手のものだって言うんなら、どうして俺たちまで取り囲んでやがるんだ。
ああ、お前らが伊藤派とかいう連中か。坂本の件じゃ世話になったらしいな。
Did he mean the assassination of Ryoma Sakamoto? Then were the Satsuma and the guards allies?
んじゃま、ご苦労さん。礼は言ったからとっとと死んでくれや。
ミキ君、危ない。おい、しっかりしろ。
Mickey went to the body of one of his men, but the man seemed to be dead already. He glared at Shiranui, seething with contempt.
随分な真似をしてくれるじゃねえか。裏切るつもりか、薩摩藩。
ああ、そういうお前らは昔の仲間を裏切ったんだろうが。坂本暗殺は新選組の原田の仕業ですって噂を広めてな。
やっぱりそうか。つまらねえ噂を流してくれやがったのはてめえらだったんだな。
ま、お前らはもう用済みってこった。口封じのためには お前ら全員殺しちまうのが一番簡単だろ。
なんだと。
Both Shinsengumi and guard were only moments from attacking when Amagiri's voice echoed across the street.
この戦力差で戦うのはおすすめしませんね。時に新選組の方々、一つ提案があるのですが。
なんだ。
そこにいる娘をこちらに預けるつもりはありませんか。そうしていただければ皆さん方のことは見逃しましょう。
おい天霧、勝手なことを抜かすな。そいつとて新選組。
Amagiri stopped the Satsuma vessel just by glaring back at him with a furious gaze.
勘違いしてもらっては困ります。判明には可能な限り従うつもりですが、私にとってはそれが第一ではありません。
しかし。
Gunshot resounded again. The Satsuma vessel fell to the ground and he was no longer moving. Shiranui blew the smoke from his gun as it slowly rose from the barrel.
まだ何か言いたいことがあるやつはいるか。この弾をぶち込まれてまだ生きてられたら聞いてやるよ。
How could he? To Shiranui, there was no enemies or allies. He was a beast that the Satsuma had only just learned they could not control.
静かになったところで答えを聞きましょう。我々の提案を受け入れるか否か。
Gee, I wonder what the answer is going to be, Amagiri. Not even a breath disturbed the silence of Aburano Koji. The demons, the Satsuma, the guards, and the Shinsengumi all waited to see how I would respond. I...
だとよ、佐野。どうする？
聞くまでもねえだろ。奴らのザレ言なんて信用できるか。平助の冗談の方がまだ可愛げがあるぜ。
いいねいいね、その強がり。じゃあこの数を突破できるのかよ、お前ら。
At a motion from Shiranui, the Satsuma rushed forward, a solid wave of men and swords that tumbled over the Shinsengumi and guard alike. Oh god, what are we doing? I was worried about Heisuke. I could see Heisuke hesitate. Who was his enemy, he must be wondering.
トワド、加勢しろ。お前ここへ何をしに来たんだ。
Heisuke re-gripped his swords, but... Heisuke! I called his name in desperation and ran up to him. I'd come here for one reason, and though our attack had hardly gone as planned, that hadn't changed.
何やってんだよバカ。切られたらどうすんだ。
He shoved me around behind him, his voice a mixture of surprise and anger. I'm sorry, but I had to tell you something. My run through the fighting had set my heart to pound like an angry drum, and my lungs burned. I took a deep breath. You have to come back to the Shinsengumi. Kondo-san, Hijikata-san, Inoue, Shimada, Yamazaki, they're all waiting for your return. I miss you, Heisuke. I want you to come back. Please.
今さら戻れるわけねえだろ。
Swords clashed and men screamed around us, but I ignored them.
伊藤さんについていくのが国のためになるって。これであんな薬に関わらずに済む。仲間を犠牲にしなくてもよくなるって。そう思ってたのに。なのに今さらどうすりゃいいんだよ。
I faltered in response to the intense sword battle, but I questioned him. Do you still believe that?
わかんねえよ。わかるわけねえじゃねえか。佐野さんを坂本殺しの犯人に仕立てるっていきなり言われて、そんなのどう考えてもおかしいんじゃねえかって思ったけど、でも
Heisuke looked pained. He had a self-derisive smile mixed that looked remorseful. It hurt me to see him so conflicted.
やっぱりダメだったのか。
I wanna hug Heisuke so bad right now!
どんなに辛くても苦しくても、自分が進む道は最後まで自分で決めるべきだったのかよ。
Heisuke.
この頃はさ、いつも新選組にいた時のことばっか考えてたよ。あの薬のこととか羅刹のこととか、そういうのは全部思い出の中から消えちまってさ、不思議と良かったことばっかり思い出しちまうんだよな。
I think about you a lot too. I'm sure I'm not the only one either.
そっか。
The clattering of swords filled the air like rain.
戻りてえな。もし新選組に戻ったって、今の俺は何のために戦えばいいのかすらわからねえけどさ。
What do you mean?
何をしているトド。こいつは新選組だろうが、切れ。
Another member of the guard leapt at us from the side, his sword driving towards me. Just then,
ダメだ。
Heisuke spun and drove the hilt of his sword into the man's stomach. The guard member lost consciousness and fell to the floor. Heisuke was in a state of shock, then let his eyes fall to the man doubled over on the ground. He almost seemed to move subconsciously. It was as if he thought he was inhabiting another person's body, staring at his hands incredulously.
トド、お前この土壇場で俺たちを裏切るつもりか。兄貴をあんな汚いやり方でなぶり殺しにした新選組の奴らに作って言うのかよ。ああ。
Heisuke's shoulders jolted in response. As he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper.
ごめんな、ミキ。俺、御陵エイジ失格だ。伊藤さんはすっげえ頭がいいし、時流を見る目も人脈もあるし、あの人が言うことならきっと正しいんだろうと思って今までついてきたけど。
Heisuke slashed at his Satsuma warrior one after another as he protected me.
だけど今は思想なんてどうでもいい。砂漠派もその派も関係ねえ。相手が誰だろうが鬼だろうが関係ねえ。
He turned to look at me over his shoulder, and the grin on his face lit up like the sun. Here was the Heisuke I knew. It was the face of the Heisuke I knew so well.
俺が守ってやるよ。
Oh!
お前を狙うすべての敵から俺がお前を守ってやる。
He really just said that. And with that final triumphant yell, he brought his sword up to face his next foe. With that, the battle began. Countless Satsuma poured into the narrow street in an attempt to choke us with sheer numbers. Nagakura's sword flickered and leapt, utterly unconcerned with any odds.
ぞろぞろと数だけは揃いやがって。死にてえやつからかかってきやがれ。
Blood spurts and screams came from everywhere.
くそ、お前らごときに殺されてたまるか。
The battle was so intense that I couldn't keep up with who was battling whom.
おとなしくそこのガキを差し出して命乞いでもすりゃよかったのによ。楽に死ねると思うんじゃねえぞ。
やめとけよ、知らぬい。この状況じゃむやみに撃っても味方の被害が増えるだけだぜ。
狙いをつけられねえじゃねえか。役に立たねえ上に邪魔なんだよ、てめえら。
He kicked out furiously at a nearby Satsuma soldier who had the misfortune to stumble into Shiranui's line of fire. This is just... I knew Nagakura, Harada, and Heisuke were skilled swordsmen, but I'd never seen them fight the way they did that night. Several of the Shinsengumi soldiers made a wall around me, and I watched as the captains tossed foes aside like they were made of straw. Then from across the battlefield, I heard Amagiri's basso rumble. Bass rumble. Basso! Bass!
単身私に挑んでくるとは。勇気だけは褒めておきましょう。
あいにくこっちは人手不足でな。嫌でも俺に付き合ってもらうぜ。
1対1でも私に勝てなかったあなたが、さらに不利なこの状況で何をなそうというのです。はっ！
Even swords weren't enough to stop Amagiri's fists, and Heisuke, with his small frame, was driven back.
チェスト
The Satsuma pressed in, looking for an advantage. No! He's surrounded! Heisuke's plight distracted me from my own, which was a mistake I regretted almost immediately. Before I realized what was happening, two Satsuma soldiers burst through the Shinsengumi line, charging straight toward me. No one was close enough to intercept them, and I was nowhere near strong enough to fight off two men on my own. They were closer now. No time to dodge. I heard the wet slice of two blades cutting into human flesh. It doesn't hurt. When I looked up, the soldiers were dead. A sword pierced the chest of one, straight through the heart, and the other had taken a wakizashi through the throat. I spun towards Heisuke across the street.
なんとか間に合ったみてえだな。
He was smiling. His arms still extended from throwing his swords, and he grinned like he was happy to see me safe. He threw his swords! Huh? That is some aim! Holy crap! Heisuke, why did you do that? He'd never even stopped to consider in my life. He'd never even stopped to consider if my life was worth his own.
見上げた度胸です。
Amagiri's fist moved horribly, painfully slow.
だが、愚かだ。
Without his swords, Heisuke had no way to block, and his throw had left him no room to dodge. No! My ragged scream echoed across the battlefield.
平助おい平助
くそてめえどけやがれくそなんだこいつらの強さは退却だ引け引け
なんだ撤退かよ。今回は雑魚どものせいで銃も使えねえしな。しょうがねえか。
Harada's blade became a snarling, monstrous whirlwind of death, and before it, the Satsuma and the demon's allies were pushed back until they finally withdrew.
くそこの場は引くぞ今夜のことは決して忘れんお前たち新選組の奴ら全員地獄に叩き落としてやるからな
Mickey and the remaining Guardian soldiers all scrambled to their feet and ran. But all of that seemed so far away from me. The street of Aburano Koji was painted with red. Everything before my eyes seemed to melt into together, coalescing into deep pools of blood. My hands were smeared with red. The words Heisuke coughed out were red.
どじっちまった。
バカ喋んな。やべえぞこの傷はもしかしたら内臓が。
Harada! His injury! Let me see it! I ran over to Heisuke to check up on him. I was praying to myself that it'd be fine. Even if it looked bad, it couldn't be serious, right? It's not as if a strike like that was going to be fatal to someone like Heisuke. I repeated those things over and over in my mind. I mean...
くそおい平助こんなとこで死ぬんじゃねえよ
Was he really going to die? No, you can't die here, Heisuke! I just couldn't get myself to believe this. But when I saw it unfold in front of me, I realized I couldn't deny what was happening. I was shivering, but I reached out to wipe the blood desperately from his cheek. His eyes were rolling back into his head, but he looked up at me, shaken and cold.
お前のこともっと守ってやりたかったのにな。かっこ悪い。
No, Heisuke, I wasn't ever so important that you should have given your life to protect me. So please save your strength.
大丈夫。心配すんなよ。
とりあえず豚舎に運ぶぞ。ここじゃどうしようもねえ。走れるな。
Of course. We ran through the night, Nagakura and Harada bearing Heisuke's bloody and beaten body back to the Shinsengumi. Every minute felt like an hour, and with every second my heart felt that much closer to tearing in half. The assassination of Ito and the destruction of the Guardians of the Imperial Tomb was later known as the Aburano Koji incident. Both the Shinsengumi and the guard were surprised by the sudden appearance of Satsuma troops and by the demons who accompanied them. Both parties had fallen for the Satsuma trap, and the battlefield was thrown into confusion. During the fight, Heisuke was mortally wounded, and had no choice but to drink the water of life and become a fury or die. As the Battle of Aburano Koji was taking place, the headquarters of the Shinsengumi came under attack from Chikage Kazuma. The monstrous thing my father had made was slowly devouring the Shinsengumi. How long before the water of life swallowed them whole?